this episode, we are going to explore a practical question that sits right at the heart of risk governance. How do you choose a framework or standard that actually fits the organization you are trying to govern? For brand new learners, the word framework can sound like a magic recipe, as if you adopt a named approach and risk management instantly becomes organized and effective. Real organizations are messier than that, and a framework that works well in one environment can become painful or useless in another if the enterprise's complexity and maturity are different. Selecting the right framework is not about picking the most famous name or the longest document. It is about choosing a structure that helps the enterprise make consistent decisions, communicate risk clearly, and improve over time without collapsing under its own weight. When we talk about complexity, we mean how many systems, processes, business units, locations, and external obligations an enterprise must coordinate. When we talk about maturity, we mean how consistently the enterprise can execute governance practices, measure performance, and learn from results. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CGEIT.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A risk framework is a structured way to define, identify, assess, respond to, and monitor risk so that decisions are not made purely by intuition. A standard is often a more specific set of requirements or guidance that helps an organization implement practices consistently. Beginners sometimes treat frameworks and standards as interchangeable, but it helps to see them as different tools. A framework often describes what good looks like and how to organize the work, while a standard often describes minimum expectations or specific controls, sometimes in a way that can be audited. The reason this distinction matters is that an enterprise may need both, but in different proportions depending on its environment. A highly regulated enterprise might need strong standards because it must prove compliance, while a fast-moving enterprise might need a framework that provides direction without creating unnecessary friction. Selecting what fits means understanding what the organization needs to achieve and what it can realistically sustain. Enterprise complexity affects framework selection because complexity creates coordination problems, and frameworks are often used to solve coordination problems. When an enterprise has many business units, a variety of services, global operations, and multiple technology stacks, risk decisions can become inconsistent if each unit invents its own approach. In that environment, a framework needs to provide common language and common categories so that risks can be compared and prioritized across the enterprise. It should also support delegation, meaning local teams can make routine decisions within consistent boundaries while enterprise leadership retains visibility into high-impact risks. If the framework is too lightweight, complex enterprises may end up with fragmented practices and blind spots where major exposures go unnoticed. On the other hand, if the framework is overly heavy or rigid, it may slow down decision-making and encourage teams to work around it, which defeats the purpose. Fit is achieved when the framework is strong enough to create alignment, but flexible enough to operate at scale. Maturity affects framework selection because maturity determines how much structure the enterprise can actually execute without turning the program into theater. A low-maturity environment might not have stable inventories of assets, consistent process ownership, or reliable metrics, so a framework that demands detailed measurement and tight control catalogs may overwhelm the organization. In that situation, the right fit is often a simpler framework approach that focuses on establishing basic governance habits, such as defining decision rights, creating a shared risk vocabulary, and implementing a manageable set of core controls. As maturity grows, the organization can adopt more detailed practices, such as quantifying certain risks, building more comprehensive measurement systems, and integrating risk reviews into portfolio governance. A common mistake is adopting a complex framework because it looks impressive, then failing to execute it consistently, which damages trust and creates cynicism. A better approach is to choose something the enterprise can actually do well, then expand as capabilities mature. One beginner misunderstanding is to assume that the best framework is the one with the most controls or the strictest requirements, because strictness can look like strength. Strict requirements can be appropriate in some contexts, But strictness without capacity leads to a pattern where people either ignore requirements or produce superficial compliance artifacts. That pattern creates a dangerous illusion of control because leaders think the enterprise is safer while exposures remain. Fit-based selection asks a different question. Will this framework produce reliable behavior change and reliable decision quality in this organization? If the enterprise cannot maintain the required processes, the framework will not deliver value no matter how well designed it is in theory. This is why governance emphasizes sustainability, because risk management is not a one-time project, but an ongoing operating discipline. A framework that is slightly simpler but consistently executed can reduce risk more effectively than a sophisticated framework that exists only on paper. Another important idea is that frameworks and standards should support the enterprise's goals and culture, not fight them. Culture matters because risk management depends on people making choices within boundaries, reporting issues honestly, and responding constructively to bad news. If a framework is introduced in a way that feels punitive or detached from business value, teams may treat it as a blocker and hide problems. If a framework is tied clearly to enterprise objectives, such as reliability, customer trust, and regulatory resilience, teams are more likely to see it as guidance rather than as punishment. Fit-based selection therefore considers not only technical requirements, but also how the enterprise works day to day. For example, a highly centralized enterprise may thrive with more standardized processes, while a decentralized enterprise may need a framework that supports local autonomy with consistent reporting. The best framework is one that helps the enterprise operate more coherently without requiring the enterprise to become a different organism overnight. Selecting frameworks also involves deciding what level of abstraction you need. Some frameworks are high-level and principle-driven, which can be excellent for aligning leadership and establishing governance structure. Other frameworks are more control-oriented, which can be excellent for implementing consistent practices across many systems. A high-level framework can fail if teams do not know what to do in practice, while a control-oriented standard can fail if it creates rigid checklists that do not adapt to different services and risks. Many enterprises combine approaches, using a high-level framework to define governance structure and a set of standards to define minimum control expectations. For beginners, the key is to see that selection is not a popularity contest, but a design choice. You are designing how the enterprise will think and act about risk. When you understand that, you also understand why fit matters so much. A fitting choice also requires thinking about how risk information will be communicated and escalated. If an enterprise has complex operations, leadership needs risk reporting that can roll up information without losing meaning. A framework should provide categories and severity language that allow meaningful aggregation, such as differentiating between operational disruption and confidentiality loss. It should also support consistent escalation thresholds, so teams know when an issue must be raised to higher decision makers. If the framework does not support clear reporting, the enterprise may drown in details or, alternatively, miss critical risks because reporting becomes inconsistent. Maturity plays a role here because better reporting requires better data and better discipline. A low-maturity enterprise might start with simpler reporting categories and gradually add detail as measurement improves. Fit means you choose a reporting approach that produces clarity rather than confusion. You also need to consider how frameworks and standards interact with the enterprise's external obligations. External obligations can include regulations, customer contracts, industry expectations, and insurance requirements, and these often require evidence that certain controls and processes exist. If an enterprise operates in a highly regulated environment, it may need standards that map to specific control requirements, so it can demonstrate adherence consistently. If external obligations are lighter, the enterprise may have more freedom to focus on risk optimization and business agility while still maintaining prudent controls. The fit-based approach does not ignore compliance. It treats compliance as one input into the overall design. A common trap is allowing compliance requirements to become the entire risk program, which can create a checklist mentality that misses broader risk trade-offs. A more mature view is that compliance is a boundary condition, while risk governance is the steering mechanism that operates within that boundary. To think about complexity and maturity together, imagine two enterprises that both want to strengthen risk governance. One is a small organization with a few systems, a tight-knit team, and limited formal processes. It might succeed with a simple framework approach that emphasizes clear ownership, basic risk identification, consistent documentation, and a manageable control baseline. The other is a global enterprise with many lines of business, heavy outsourcing, and extensive regulatory obligations. It may need a more comprehensive approach that supports consistent control expectations across diverse environments, formal escalation paths, and integrated reporting for leadership oversight. If you swapped the frameworks, the small organization could be overwhelmed and the large organization could become fragmented. This is why FIT is not just a nice idea. It is the difference between a program that improves behavior and one that becomes bureaucracy. Governance works when it matches reality and nudges reality toward maturity without demanding an impossible leap. As we wrap up, selecting risk frameworks and standards that fit enterprise complexity and maturity means choosing structures that the enterprise can execute consistently, that support clear communication, and that align risk decisions with enterprise objectives. Complexity drives the need for coordination, consistency, and scalable reporting, while maturity drives how much structure and detail the enterprise can sustain without creating theater. Fit-based selection avoids the trap of adopting overly sophisticated approaches that fail in practice, and it also avoids the trap of overly lightweight approaches that cannot coordinate a complex environment. When you choose well, the framework becomes a shared language and a shared operating rhythm that makes risk optimization possible. If you remember one principle, let it be that the best framework is the one the enterprise will actually use to make better decisions. Because a framework that lives on paper cannot reduce risk, but a framework that fits can steadily improve the enterprise's ability to pursue value with informed trade-offs.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.